Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, a podcast by MedComms experts. We share medical communications insights and advice from the best and brightest in the industry to find out what they're doing to push our industry forward. Here's your host, Wesley Portegies.
Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications. My name is Wesley Portegies and I'm your host. Today we're joined by Simon Priou. He is a global leader in medical education and communications at bioMérieux, with deep expertise in infectious diseases, diagnostics, and international collaboration. So Simon leads a team focused on equipping healthcare professionals around the world with unbiased, high-impact medical education. But what sets him apart is really his hands-on, local-first approach to global medical communications. So in this episode, we're going to explore how to build strong and trust-based partnerships between the global and local teams. We're also going to talk about what it takes to gather and act on the real local needs that are there. And rolling out content isn't enough. You really have to close the loop and prove value. Welcome, Simon.
Hello. Thank you, Wesley, for having me on the show. Very grateful to have been selected on this topic. I really hope I will be able to share some insights and experience around the medical communication field.
Amazing. I'm glad to have you here. Thank you for being here today. So, Simon, what was your really defining moment when you realized you wanted to fight for a more collaborative and local or affiliate first approach?
So to start, I would first say that we aim today to have this collaborative approach, but I think that we're not there yet. And I would like to say that we will never be there yet. For me, it's more an everlasting process where every year we need to build on the previous years and to add to it. So coming back on your question of the defining moment, I think that we all experience this year assessment. Every year at the end, we have to prove the metrics. No. So back to your question of a defining moment, I would like to take the example of the year-end assessment of activities. Every year, we look at the metrics. We try to understand what worked and what didn't work. We also try to align with the KPIs we set at the beginning of the year. So if I take a concrete example, a couple of years back, we were doing this exercise of assessing our activities. And at that moment, we were very surprised of what we found, meaning that we were sure the resources, the medical education resources created during the year were going to perform, that they were going to find their audience because we thought that we had a need to provide it. But when we looked at the metrics, well, they were simply not used in the field. So that was very complicated for us at Global to try to understand why. And I think that can speak to a lot of our listeners today, the fact to invest a lot of time, to invest a lot of resources into the creation of an activity or a specific format, and to see that at the end, the people that are supposed to use it do not use it. So I think that today, this would be the defining moment that I would like to highlight, because that was really the trigger that led to a different approach in terms of medical education and medical communication, but also opened the door, I think, to this everlasting process. Because without this defining moment, we wouldn't have today the discussions, the processes, as well as the view of the field.
Something isn't working and you have the aspiration to change it, right? So you realized, looking at the metrics, that your materials were underutilized by the local organizations, and then you wondered why and started working on that. And you know what, you're not alone in that. And it's kind of funny because when we first connected and spoke about this topic together, that was before we ran our annual MedComms Landscape Survey. And in the meantime, we completed that. And because of our conversation, I actually thought about including some questions on this. And actually, 77% of the global medical affairs and medical communications leaders that we surveyed, they actually reported ongoing challenges with communications between the local organizations. And this was spanning from resource adoption, like utilization of the content they make, but also the messaging and communications between global and local as well. And it made me happy because it made it even clearer that we needed to have this conversation here today. So to go back to your answer here, So you looked at your annual plan, you had some metrics, then you kind of noticed that the resources weren't maybe used as much as you wanted to. What did you do as a result? Like, how did you reshape your activities?
I'm not sure we reshaped our activities at first. What we really tried to do is to understand. Really, we tried to dig inside our organization to really understand why. First of all, the resources were not used. Why a lot of our colleagues did not know of these resources, because we were sure that it wasn't the content. We also assessed the content, and the content was there. It was matching the need that we had received, but something wasn't working at all. So the first thing that we really looked at was the communication internally. Who was aware of the resource availability? And that was one of the first improvement areas that we found. A lot of our colleagues did not know that the resource was available. So, of course, they didn't use it. So to try to tackle this a little, what we really did is we opened the mic, we could say. We opened the chat. We told people, please, when you have a need, contact us. We will try to answer. So, of course, in a big organization, it's very hard to answer to everyone. But with the different global, regional, and local layers, it's easier if we have contacts. So we identified contacts for medical activities, and these contacts were the spokespersons of their organization. And then we also put in place some very simple methods. As I said, chats, but also some repositories, some open discussions, some forums, to try to make sure that the first identified improvement area was tackled, and that was the communication, saying to the person what is available and what is not.
Yeah, I really like that. I guess especially like, obviously you're in different locations and there's, like all kinds of differences. Also, there's some cultural impact potentially across how to communicate with each other and how you can open the floor for them or open the mic, as you mentioned it. Now, I guess this is not yet implemented like that everywhere. So for some of our colleagues listening to this episode, like, what would you say is the most outdated belief when it comes to global medical affairs functions about how to support local organizations, and how does that play out in practice?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of outdated models. The first one will be the one size fits all. For me, that doesn't work. That was another area of improvement that we found at that time, is that the local needs varies depending on the region, depending on the teams asking for them. So I think that the one size fits all is simply outdated. Today, we need to create global resources that are based on an identified and qualified need. So I think that it's really important to be sure of the request before starting. So in order to really make sure that the teams creating the activity are aware of the need and have incorporated that need into their activities, I think it's very important to open the discussion. So it's always easy with our digital environment to send out a chat to make sure that we have understood, but also to incorporate this person in the creation process. We all know that it takes a lot of time to create an activity or a resource, but we can always send out some highlight of it to make sure we are in the right direction. Because if we create something that is not useful for local teams, for sure it will not be used.
Most global organizations probably realize that they need to come up with something that can be used by the local organizations, right? However, we do see it as like one size fits all, which, I always like to call one size fits no one approach. But why do you think people gravitate to that approach? What do you think the challenges are that make people do that?
So indeed, there is really an issue around this one size fits all. I think that a global team that creates activities, they want everyone to use it. So it's maybe a mindset shift to have, saying that, okay, I am creating some resources, but I know that in half of the world, in 30% of the countries, it will not be used. So global teams also need to really understand the markets to make sure that the activity they are creating matches at least one or two markets. That way, you have your adoption in a part of the world. And then for the other countries, other regions, you can adapt if you have time. This is the other issue is we all have very busy schedules. It's very time consuming to adapt an activity or a resource to a local market or region. So I think that the lack of resource always makes us think that one size fits all is a good option, but it isn't. Then, of course, you have the language barrier. I think a lot of medical affairs are working in English today, but that cannot be used everywhere in the world because of the issue of English. A lot of people in the countries want their local languages. So I think only providing English is a barrier to the local adoption of the activity. So we cannot provide an activity in 10, 15, 20 plus languages. But I think that it is very important for global teams to make sure that their language is translatable or adaptable locally. So the format is also, for me, one of the key things to keep in mind when providing an activity for our regional or local colleagues.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. So now let's say, Simon, we have a magic wand and we solve all these problems, right? So now the global organization is able to provide the perfect resource for every local organization. How would it help us? Like, what would the impact be?
I think that the magic wand will provide a lot of activities because, as I was saying, one activity cannot be for everyone. So the magic wand will allow us to adapt, to localize each activity. So a lot of people speak today of AI, the power of AI that could be your magic wand here. I'm not sure that today AI allows us to do this. Maybe that's a topic for another podcast of the series. But the magic wand for me would take an activity, a generic, if I can say, activity provided by a global team, and will allow it to be localized specifically for one market, but also for the audience in that market.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was thinking through our discussion here and also looking at our survey. And someone in the survey actually wrote something along the lines like, we don't even have a way to know that the local organizations are using our resources, right? And the thought it brought up was that I think a lot of global teams are kind of more focusing maybe on distribution, like content distribution versus enablement and empowerment of their affiliates. So I think also like there's something to say that we might need like a different way to look at what success means, right? Is it like making something and the affiliates using it? Or can we actually aim way higher than that? And is it really about like coming up with some kind of way where, you know, all the strategy follows through properly, the why is clear to the local organizations as well. I worked in an affiliate myself, right? I was working in the Netherlands and then at the European level. And to be honest, I always felt that like global didn't get it, right? Which I know in hindsight, like was actually not the case. I think the case was global wasn't really able to help me understand why they provided what they provided and how that was actually useful to us. So I think like there's multiple levels of communications that we're gonna need other than, hey, we made a slide deck and you can find it here. It needs to also be supported with like the why and the strategy behind it. But maybe focusing a little bit more on that distribution part of the desired future state here. How does your team know that something is available and when they would use it?
So I think I will call your magic wand again here to find a solution because, of course, this is, for me, the biggest challenge is to make sure that the communication goes to everyone at the correct moment. So for that, we, of course, have a lot of different channels available in industry today. We have CRMs, emails, newsletter, internal social media sometimes, but also internal websites, forums. I mean, the list goes on and on. What I want to try to say here is we do not have a classic process. I think we need to have the try and assess approach. Try one format, one channel, assess and see how many people have viewed your communication through that channel, but not only a number. You also need to know who. And then you will identify inside your organization some hotspots where a group of individuals will prefer to receive the information, let's say via email. Others will prefer to receive it on a forum. There is also the time to put it in this big equation. Some people want the information right now. Other people want it once a quarter. Other people want it every week. So you will never be able, I think, to please everyone. So you need to find your own routine. You need to assess what you are doing on I don't want to say daily basis, but at least weekly basis to make sure that the information is sent to the correct person at the correct time.
Hey, we need your help. The best way to help us grow and reach more medical affairs professionals is to share with your community. If you love our podcast, please hit subscribe, leave us a review, and that way we can keep sharing insights from the best and brightest in the medical communications industry. Let's push our industry forward together.
So how does this work in your organization currently? And what are the things you feel work well about it, and what are some things where you are aiming to improve?
So I think in terms of medical communication and in a company, I would say even communication, not only medical, there is a tsunami of information. Everybody is receiving information from everyone. It is sometimes classified, most of the times not. So here, maybe I would like to say less is more. Maybe try to be consistent in your messaging, but do not send everything to everyone. You really need to narrow down the audience. It is very easy to send out an email to thousands of people, but if only 10, even less, 5 to 10% really have a need for that information, why send it to everyone? I mean, there is really a need to narrow down the scope of medical communication to the correct audience.
So how I'm trying to get more specific on how you currently do that. So what are some channels that you're using that you feel work well for those communications, and how do you know?
So today, to make sure that the correct audience has the correct message, we use various channels. Of course, we use email. It is very easy to send an email. We just need to make sure we send it to the correct person. So for that, we are working constantly on identifying that audience. And to identify that audience, it really comes back to the first moment of the creation of a resource during the need. We really, at that moment, try to specify the internal audience that will need that resource once it's available. We also try to have a lot of discussions with our colleagues using the materials, not only for feedback, but also to let them know what is available. That can be through forums that we host via Teams, for example, where everybody has an open mic to ask questions. We also send out some, we could say, quarterly or half-year newsletter, regrouping all of the information in one simple newsletter. The why we use different channels is because we know we are all different and that everybody needs his own or her own way of receiving the information. So by multiplying this information, we try to send to make sure that everybody has it. But we are also having a less is more approach where we do not want to send everything to everyone because it is simply too much.
Let's say there's a demand for a field medical resource. Then if you develop that, then you will share it specifically with, for instance, the field medical leads of each organization, rather than with everyone in medical affairs, for instance.
Yes, we really try to be specific when sending out a resource. And of course, we are very close to our colleagues in the field, to the teams in the field. And we really make sure that the correct resource is pushed to the correct team. Emails is very easy, but we all have an inbox that is full of unread emails. So we also sometimes use direct chat to make sure that the resource is used on the field. And to make sure it's used on the field, just ask for feedback. Have you received this resource? What do you think of it? do you have any comments for the next update? It can also be in that way, asking their point of view on an existing resource that they're using it or not.
Yeah. So I'm quickly looking at the data from the survey, and 86% says that they use email, and then 71% internal newsletters, and then 41% Microsoft Teams or SharePoint. So these are obviously not mutually exclusive, right? So a lot of organizations seem to use the combination of these three, which, surprised me in a way, because I think email is in a way an efficient channel to communicate, but it is maybe not that effective. Like you already said, like people's inboxes are full. Maybe someone is just on vacation a week and then comes back to a wall of emails and misses the email. So, I guess from what you're saying, you're kind of reminding me of how we communicate to our external audiences, right? This is kind of a omnichannel approach for internal use.
I completely agree with you. We need to have this omnichannel approach internally. Either you're communicating directly to healthcare professionals or to your internal colleagues. They are your audience. They are our customers, I would like to say, in terms of medical communication. So we need to answer their request, how they consume information. And I think that it's very important that we as global teams really understand how they want to receive the information, and that we provide that communication channel, and that we do not impose our own communication channel to everyone. Because if we do that, for sure, the information will get lost somewhere and it will disappear in a black hole.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned the black hole, because that was going to be my next question for you, which is, input from affiliates or local organization disappearing into the black hole. Because global organizations, I think they all know that they actually want to develop really what the affiliates need. So often they go through the process of asking for input and feedback. But then sometimes the local organizations are surprised when the result is there, because it ends up being maybe feeling like their feedback wasn't really, considered. So that means there needs to be some kind of process, I guess, and there also needs to be a level of trust, so that the local organizations know that if they invest time and energy in giving feedback, it actually appears in the results. So, could you maybe share an experience from yourself with us where the feedback really changed how the output was defined and how it impacted your organization or your projects?
I think that global can really play a critical role in putting teams together and discussing around the table. It is already very difficult, as we discussed today, to have a discussion between global teams and local teams in some aspects. But it is also, from my experience, sometimes difficult to have discussion between local teams. So having a partner as global in that discussion can be very helpful, and it can be a win-win situation. Every local teams have their own activities. They have some great example of what works and also what doesn't work. So I think it's critical for them to also learn from each other and to discuss. And here, from my experience, we play a real role in putting every stakeholder around the table and just asking them to discuss on a topic. We learn a lot, of course, in terms of needs, of experience from the field, but a country can learn as much from another country.
Mm-hmm. I like that. It's kind of almost like a show and tell, right? So let's say, just making something up here. So you're saying, let's say the team in Germany had a very successful experience, and you'll now sit around the table with all the other local organizations too, and global, facilitating that discussion, and they could share what they did and why it was so successful, so others can benefit from that. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, definitely. It's really a best practice sharing, I could say. It's learning from the others, but not always in a positive way. It can also be sharing experience of a failure, of what didn't happen well, but always saying the why, to avoid our colleagues also maybe falling into the same trap. So it's really a situation sharing that is a win-win for everyone.
So this is interesting, because somehow in my mind I was thinking maybe a little bit singularly about collecting input and feedback from local organizations. In my mind, Global would ask this from every local organization, but almost like in a silo, and then try to make sense out of it. And then I was thinking like, okay, so how are we gonna deal with conflicting input, right? So the one country wants this, and the other country wants exactly the opposite. So facilitating these discussions, kind of around the virtual table, makes a lot of sense to me. How else are you dealing with conflicting input and things that they are requesting that are potentially incompatible, either with the global strategy or with what other countries are asking for?
So when we ask, we know that we will receive a lot of requests. And of course, we will not be able to address all of these requests, even if it is need-based. So we need to be very clear when we ask of what we ask, I would like to say. That means that we need to give a frame of the request that we will be able to address. We will not ask our colleagues to spend hours explaining, identifying, assessing a need if we already know that we will not do it. So we always give some high-level ground rules to everyone to make sure that the requests we receive are in a way compatible with our strategy. But we always say that we will not be able to do everything, and we will need to compromise. And so in order to compromise, what I found very useful was, once again, having the regions discuss between each other, because the needs don't vary that much. And sometimes regrouping activities can be a win-win situation, once again, between different regions. Of course, we need to take into account the differences between the markets, the regulations and laws and all of that, and the language, of course. But we can always find common grounds on part of an activity. So this common part, in some cases, can allow Global to help in the activity by providing the basis and then allowing each region to adapt maybe the 20, 30% rest of the activity to their local needs. So here, to respond, I would say that having a discussion always works. Sending out an email without giving details rarely works.
So I like this concept. So you basically say there are certain guardrails that we set, like there are certain things that you're going to do anyway, but then there are certain things that are maybe more flexible. So on that part, you're looking for input and feedback. Now, more practically, what is the format that is most effective to do so? Are these like regular meetings that you have together with all the countries, or is this like virtual, or like, I'm trying to really understand like a real life approach.
So the real life approach that we have today is setting up meetings. It's always nicer to discuss with our colleagues live, even if it's through Teams in our case, rather than sending out emails, waiting 1 week and having a response. So we really commit to having a discussion on the regular basis. Some of them will be between our global teams and our regional teams. Some of them will include everyone. Of course, here we need to take into account the different hours in the world. So it's always very difficult to all be together in the same call. But we are able today, through the technologies that we have, to have these live discussions between our colleagues. Of course, at Global, we will not be able to have a discussion with every person in the field, if I can say, or in the different countries, because it would take us too much time. So we are also discussing a lot with the regional directors, the regional medical affairs, asking them to gather all the needs, to digest it from a regional point of view, and then to come and have this discussion with us. And with this approach, we really try to make sure that every region is heard. And this is, for me, one of the most interesting part of our global work, is to be able to discuss with all of these different people in the regions and to gather their feedback.
So yeah, looking for the next step, Simon, on like, how do you know that the resource is actually working in the market? Because it's never, right? Like it's working to an extent, but there's always something that could be better. So how do we go about using feedback from the field in local organizations to further optimize the resources you have, or future resources for that matter.
Indeed, having a view of how it works is very important because it will feed all the next resources and the next steps. But it is also very difficult to receive this feedback. Of course, when something doesn't work well or is not correctly done, we will have the feedback so that we know that it will come back to us. But when it is positive, when we have some very nice customer or healthcare professional feedback on it, it's always more difficult to receive. So we use different channels. Again, the open discussions, a simple survey sometimes helps to gather a lot of feedback very quickly, but of course it's not qualified. So we also have some direct discussions with people on the field that we know are using some of the resources because we never really know which one are used, and we discuss with them. We simply plan a call. We ask them, when are you available? I would have some questions for you. And this way we are able to try to have a little view, because it's not a complete view, but a little view of how it is used, and also to try to gather feedback for the next steps. So giving feedback takes a lot of time and resources. So I think it's also important to make sure that this feedback, once gathered, is well analyzed and that it is also shared afterwards.
Yeah, so you're saying like you're trying to avoid that they feel like, okay, now I give all this feedback and it just nothing was done with it because they don't hear anything back, right? So you're collecting it, analyzing it, and then tell them like, hey, we got feedback. This is the takeaway from all the different local organizations, so they kind of understand like, hey, actually Global is doing something with the information we provide. That's what you mean.
Yes, definitely. I think it's very important that the person giving feedback feels that they are heard and also understood.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's a great tip. Simon, I want to do a little game with you, and it's called a quick fire round. So I'm going to list like a few issues that I have seen in the industry happen. So what if I name these and you tell me if you've seen it too? But more importantly, what should teams do to avoid it in the future?
Yes.
Okay. So how about this? Global sends a toolkit or a bunch of resources, but doesn't give any guidance.
To be able to mitigate this risk, I think it is important for the person creating the activity or the team creating that resource to really include in the first briefing, how will it be communicated? How will you explain how to use it? If we include this from the beginning, you mitigate the risk of sending out a toolkit, but not explaining how to use it.
Okay, I like that. How about this one? You over-customize for one affiliate and the others feel left out.
I think that this can happen and happens. At Global, we really need to be very careful when we balance the project and the point of views to make sure that activities during the year cover every region. Of course, an activity will always have a viewpoint more specific for a region or a country. But when we look at the entirety of the projects over a year, it needs to be balanced.
How about this one? You ask for local feedback, but then it doesn't appear in the global plan.
Even if the feedback is not included in the global plan, it is still very important for the global teams to explain why. And through this why, it will allow the person requesting to continue the next year and the next year to request. But for sure, this must be very frustrating to spend time giving feedback, identifying a need, because it is, of course, very important for that team to not see it at the end of the year in the global plan.
Time is flying when having fun, they say. So we're getting already to the end of this episode together here. But before we close out, I wanted to ask you, if you could only choose one thing, what mindset shift would you like global teams to embrace when it comes to the topic we discussed today, enabling their local organizations?
To finish, I would just add that I think that global teams really need to understand their colleagues, to be in their shoes when it comes to medical communication. We all have different ways of consuming the information. And I think that global teams today really need to have this omnichannel approach internally to make sure that the correct information is sent to the correct team wherever they are in the world.
Yeah, I really like that, especially the last part. Like the omnichannel approach. I think it's a whole different mindset, right? So instead of let's make a resource and distribute it to the local countries and move on, it's more like, hey, actually, we need to communicate to this audience just like we communicate to our external audiences in order to make it work. That's an important bridge to build, and I really like that perspective. Well, Simon, I had a great time discussing this with you here today. It sounds like you've really, built something special in your own organization around how you approach this. I heard a lot of inspirational and insightful ways on how to make sure that you can, leverage the local organizations better or enable them better. It might be a better expression. So thank you for sharing your insights today.
Thank you very much.
Transforming Medical Communications is brought to you by Medcom's experts. To find out more about Medcom's experts and how we create some of the most cutting-edge medical communications programs anywhere in the world, visit www.medcoms-experts.com. And then make sure to search for Transforming Medical Communications in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Medcom's experts, thanks for listening.